The prison yard was alive with noise, a cacophony of shouts, clanging metal, and the occasional bark of a guard. It was Monday morning, the yard packed with inmates taking advantage of the brief window of freedom before the next lockdown. But amidst the chaos, one man moved differently, calm, measured, every step deliberate. Seagal. He didn't shout, he didn't flex, he didn't need to, even without a flashy uniform or a gang of loyal followers. His presence demanded attention. In a place where intimidation was currency, Seagal's silence was worth more than any display of aggression. That's when the bully saw him. A hulking figure with broad shoulders, tattoos crawling up his arms like dark rivers, a permanent sneer etched onto his face. He had been the terror of this yard for months, and he wasn't about to let some quiet, old-timer walk through without taking a shot. "Hey you," the bully barked, pointing a thick, calloused finger at Seagal. His voice carried over the noise, turning heads. "Think you're better than us. Think you can just stroll through my yard like you own it." Seagal didn't respond. His gaze remained steady, focused on the ground in front of him, calm, like a predator assessing prey, not rushing in, but fully aware of every move around him. The bully's smirk widened, his friends gathering behind him, ready to cheer, to laugh, to escalate. He flexed his fists, muscles taut, veins standing out. "Move aside, old man," he growled, "or I'll make you regret it." Then, without warning, he lunged. The yard seemed to slow as Seagal's eyes met his. Time didn't just slow, it sharpened. Every swing, every motion of the bully's massive body was calculated, but Seagal's calm was unshakable. In that instant, the other inmates froze. Some whispered, "Who is this guy?" Others stepped back uneasy. Even the guards, distracted by routine, noticed something was off. The bully thought he was about to make a name for himself, to humiliate a man he assumed weak. But what he didn't know was simple. Underestimating Steven Seagal would be the worst mistake of his life. Because in this yard, among chaos and violence, there was a storm that had yet to reveal its full power. And the bully was standing directly in its path. The morning sun burned high over the prison yard, casting sharp shadows on cracked concrete and rusted metal fences. It was another routine day for most inmates. The same clanging of doors, the same arguments over territory, the same whispered deals that never reached completion. Yet amidst this ordinary chaos, a storm was brewing. Steven Seagal moved through the yard with quiet assurance. His posture relaxed, but every sense alert, scanning, measuring. He wasn't here to make friends. He wasn't here to boast. He was simply present. That presence alone was enough to unsettle some of the men around him. In a place where loud voices and flexed muscles dictated respect, quiet confidence was often mistaken for weakness. And weakness was prey. The bully, known among the yard as Crusher, was a mountain of a man, broad shoulders, thick arms corded with muscles, tattoos that mapped his violent history, and a face that seemed permanently twisted into a sneer. Crusher's reputation was simple. Take what you can, intimidate anyone who challenges you, and never show fear. Today, he had his eyes on Seagal. Something about the man's calm, deliberate pace made Crusher's blood boil. He couldn't tolerate someone ignoring him, someone who didn't flinch, someone who seemed untouchable. "Hey!" Crusher's voice boomed across the yard, sharp enough to cut through the background noise of shouting inmates. Heads turned. Some looked curious, others wary. "You think you're better than us, huh? Think you can just walk through my yard without respect?" Seagal didn't glance up. He didn't raise a hand. He simply kept walking, his gaze focused, his expression unreadable. Every step he took was deliberate, measured like water flowing smoothly around rocks in a stream. There was no rush, no panic, no pretense, just calm. Crusher's eyes narrowed. How dare this man move through the yard as if he owned nothing but the air around him? His friends, a cluster of loyal followers, moved closer, forming a half-circle of intimidation. They laughed nervously at first, but the laughter faltered as they noticed the way Seagal's calm seemed to absorb the aggression like a sponge. "Move aside, old man," Crusher barked, stepping directly in Seagal's path. He flexed his massive arms, rolling his shoulders as though preparing for a fight he assumed would be easy. "Or I'll make you regret ever stepping into my yard." Seagal stopped, The sunlight caught his face, highlighting the subtle lines of age, experience, and silent strength. His eyes lifted slowly to meet Crusher's, and the yard seemed to hold its breath. There was no fear in them, no doubt. Just a quiet certainty that spoke volumes. The other inmates sensed it too. Whispers began spreading like wildfire. "Who is this guy? I heard he used to be in military or something. Don't mess with him." Some tried to hide it with mock laughter, but even the toughest men couldn't shake the instinctive unease. Crusher snarled. He was used to reactions like fear, submission, or at least some form of flinching. This calm, it infuriated him. Every inch of him screamed dominance, aggression, violence, yet here stood a man untouched by intimidation. He swung his fist in a quick, violent arc, a strike meant to humiliate, to show the yard who was boss. But Seagal didn't move. Not in the way Crusher expected, not in the way anyone expected. Every punch, every movement was intercepted with near, effortless precision, a soft parry, a slight adjustment, subtle enough that only the trained eye could see it. The crowd of inmates began to shift uneasily, sensing that this encounter was not going as planned. Crusher's followers exchanged nervous glances. The jokes, the laughter, the bravado, all dissolved into tense silence. Seagal finally spoke, his voice low and calm, carrying authority without force. "Violence is loud because it's insecure," he said. The words, simple but powerful, struck the yard harder than any punch could. Even the guards, idly watching from their posts, paused, sensing the shift in energy. Crusher's jaw tightened. Rage began to override his instinct for strategy. He had always relied on brute strength and fear to control, but here, against this man, neither worked. Every attack was met with effortless resistance, every move countered with quiet precision. The yard was no longer a place of casual intimidation. It had become a stage for a lesson in true power. Inmates who had once laughed or jeered now watched in awe, some whispering prayers for survival, others silently hoping not to be next. Steven Seagal didn't need to shout. He didn't need to show anger. His calm alone dismantled the bully's ego. Each swing Crusher threw only tightened the invisible cage of control around him, until finally the once dominant man paused, chest heaving, humiliated in front of his peers. In that moment it became painfully clear. Underestimating Steven Seagal was not just a mistake. It was the first step toward a lesson that no bully in that yard would ever forget. The yard had gone quiet, the chatter of the inmates fading into tense whispers. All eyes were on Steven Seagal and the hulking figure of Crusher, the prison bully who had ruled this corner of the yard with fists and intimidation. The sun cast harsh shadows across the cracked concrete, highlighting muscles, tattoos, and the anticipation hanging thick in the air. Every movement seemed magnified, every breath drawn sharper. Crusher's ego burned hotter than the morning sun. He had been the top dog here for months, feared, respected, untouchable. And now, standing face to face with a man who didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't even blink in the heat of his aggression, his pride began to crack. "You think you can just waltz through here without respect?" Crusher spat, stepping forward, fists clenched, veins pulsing along his thick arms. His followers formed a circle behind him, eager to see their leader assert dominance, to crush the intruder like he had crushed countless others. Seagal, however, remained calm, his posture loose but controlled, his gaze steady. No fear, no anger, just quiet focus. His presence alone seemed to absorb the aggression around him, leaving the bully's rage exposed and vulnerable. Crusher swung first, a brutal, wide hook aimed straight at Seagal's jaw. Time seemed to slow in the yard, the punch cutting through the air, aimed to humiliate, to establish dominance. But Seagal didn't flinch. With the slightest movement barely perceptible, he deflected the blow. The hand brushed the punch aside, guiding it off course with effortless precision. The bully's eyes widened in disbelief. His fist, meant to land a crushing blow, had been stopped mid-flight, redirected with such calm that it left him off balance. He stumbled slightly, anger flaring hotter than ever. "You lucky," Crusher snarled, but his words were cut off by Seagal's quiet, commanding voice. "Rage makes you predictable." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a tone that made the bully hesitate. His blood boiling, yet his mind forced to register the truth. Crusher lunged again, this time with both fists swinging, a flurry of aggression born from desperation. The yard held its collective breath. Every inmate knew what was happening. They had seen men thrown to the ground, humiliated, beaten by Seagal's unmatched skill. This wasn't a fight, it was a reckoning. With fluid, almost imperceptible movements, Seagal intercepted each strike. Every counter was precise, controlled, almost surgical. He didn't strike to harm, not yet. He simply redirected the energy, turning aggression into momentum that left Crusher stumbling, exposed, humiliated. Each attack met resistance, each swing turned against its own maker. The crowd whispered, eyes wide. Some tried to laugh nervously, others clutched their fists, unsure whether to intervene or run. Even the guards, stationed around the yard, shifted uneasily, sensing that this was more than a simple prison scuffle. Crusher's frustration boiled over. His fists were now swinging wildly, reckless and furious. His friends shouted encouragement, but even they couldn't mask the growing fear. For the first time, Crusher was being outmatched, not by size, not by brute force, but by skill, composure, and precision. Seagal's calm demeanor never wavered. He moved like water, absorbing, redirecting, neutralizing without a hint of effort. His eyes, steady and unflinching, met Crusher's with a silent message. You are out of your depth. Then, with emotion so subtle that few noticed, Seagal stepped aside at the perfect moment, using the bully's own momentum to send him sprawling onto the hard concrete. The impact echoed across the yard, a harsh punctuation to the display of skill and control. Crusher lay on the ground, chest heaving, face flushed with embarrassment and rage. His followers stared, mouths agape, unsure whether to rush to his aid or flee. The other inmates were silent, the tension thick, broken only by the distant clanging of the guard tower doors. Seagal's voice, calm and cold, cut through the silence. Violence is loud because it's insecure. You attacked without thought, relying on anger and ego. That's always a mistake. The yard seemed to pause at his words. Inmates shifted uneasily. Guards took notice, and the bully, still lying on the ground, realized the truth. He had miscalculated. He had assumed that aggression alone would dictate respect, but he had not accounted for discipline, skill, or the quiet force of someone who had mastered both. By the time Seagal finally moved, stepping past Crusher without a glance, the lesson had already been delivered. The bully's attempt to dominate had failed spectacularly, leaving him humiliated, exposed, and painfully aware of his own vulnerability. In that moment, the hierarchy of the yard shifted. Power wasn't loud, power wasn't reckless. It was precise, controlled, and calm. And anyone who underestimated Steven Seagal would learn that lesson, whether they were ready or not. The yard, once filled with noise and aggression, settled into an uneasy hush. Every eye followed Seagal as he walked, unshaken, silent, untouchable. And Crusher, chest heaving, realized that today he had made his worst mistake ever. The prison yard was silent now, a stark contrast to the chaos that had ruled just moments before. Every sound, the clanging of metal gates, the shuffle of footsteps, the distant bark of a guard felt amplified. Inmates froze in place, eyes wide, mouths slightly agape. Even the usual background chatter had vanished, replaced by a tense, almost reverent hush. The demonstration they had just witnessed was not ordinary. It was extraordinary. Crusher lay sprawled on the cracked concrete, chest heaving, face flushed with anger and embarrassment. His ego, once towering, had been shattered in a matter of minutes. He hadn't been defeated merely by brute force. He had been dismantled by skill, calm precision, and a presence that exuded unshakable confidence. For the first time, the so-called ruler of this corner of the yard realized that his reign was fragile. Steven Seagal, meanwhile, remained utterly composed. He adjusted the collar of his simple, dark jacket, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the fabric. Not a single bead of sweat betrayed the intensity of the encounter, nor did his posture suggest fatigue. He exuded control, a quiet, unwavering authority that demanded attention without demanding it. Every inmate in the yard felt it. Every eye was drawn to him, not out of fear, but out of awe. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, growing like wildfire. Who? Who is that guy? I heard he used to be in special forces. Don't mess with him. Don't even think about it. Even the guards stationed around the perimeter noticed the change. They had initially assumed it was a minor scuffle, another ego clash between inmates. But now they were unsure. One officer shifted uneasily, calling quietly into his radio. We might need to keep an eye on him. Yeah, the tall guy with the jacket. In the crowd of inmates, reactions varied. Some had spent years surviving by intimidation, but this display had unsettled them. They had seen violence, loud, chaotic, and uncontrolled. But Seagal's calm precision was something entirely different. It wasn't just power, it was mastery, and it forced them to reevaluate the hierarchy of the yard. Several inmates moved to help Crusher, though hesitation was evident. They hovered nearby, hands half raised, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. A few muttered apologies, their voices tinged with genuine fear. Crusher's closest allies exchanged nervous glances, silently acknowledging that their leader's failure had exposed them all. One younger inmate, who had been leaning against the wall, whispered to his friend, "I don't think anyone can touch him. Look at the way he moves. It's like he's untouchable." His companion nodded, swallowing hard, eyes glued to Seagal. The bully, still lying on the ground, attempted to push himself up, but even that small act of defiance felt weak. His muscles trembled, his pride shredded. He realized painfully that his usual tactics, intimidation, aggression, sheer force, had no effect here, not against this man. Seagal's gaze scanned the yard briefly, acknowledging the reactions without a word. There was no gloating, no posturing, no unnecessary display. His silence spoke louder than any shout. The message was clear, respect was earned, not demanded, and power was demonstrated through control, not chaos. Slowly, a few inmates began to murmur quietly among themselves, nodding in agreement. Others, still wide-eyed, stepped back, giving Seagal more space. Even Crusher's followers began to disperse slightly, unsure of their next move. The yard had shifted in those brief tense moments. A new order had been silently established. A lone guard approached cautiously, walking behind Seagal but keeping a safe distance. "You okay, inmate?" he asked, not expecting a response. Seagal nodded slightly, barely noticeable, and continued walking toward the edge of the yard. The gesture was minimal, but it carried weight, calm, composed, in control. By the time Seagal reached the far side of the yard, the reaction was unanimous. Inmates who had once mocked or challenged him now kept their distance, whispers of awe and respect following his every step. Crusher, still on the ground, finally met his eyes. For the first time, he felt true fear, not for his life, but for his reputation, his ego, his very sense of dominance. The yard had witnessed a lesson that day. Brute strength and loud threats could no longer dictate respect. True power came quietly, calmly, and with unwavering confidence. And those who underestimated it, as Crusher had, paid the price. As Seagal prepared to exit the yard, the collective tension remained. Every man knew they had seen something extraordinary, something that would be talked about for weeks. Stories of his skill, his calm, and the total dismantling of the bully would spread like wildfire, reshaping the unspoken rules of the prison yard. Steven Seagal walked out, silent, composed, untouchable. Behind him, the yard remained frozen in the aftermath, a mixture of shock, awe, and respect. The bully's mistake had become everyone's lesson: underestimate him at your own peril. The prison yard had settled into an uneasy quiet. Even the harsh sunlight seemed to dim, as if giving space to the tension that lingered. Inmates who had once laughed at newcomers or challenged each other now moved cautiously, their eyes constantly flicking toward Steven Seagal. He was no longer just a man in a jacket walking through the yard. He had become the measure of strength, the standard by which dominance would now be judged. Crusher, still sprawled on the cracked concrete, struggled to rise. Sweat and dirt streaked his face. But it wasn't pain that weighed heaviest on him. It was humiliation. His carefully constructed image as the unshakable bully had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. Every punch he had thrown, every threat he had issued, had been met with calm, unyielding precision, and the realization stung worse than any blow he had ever received. Steven Seagal paused at the center of the yard, turning his gaze slowly to take in the reactions of the other inmates. There was no anger, no triumph, just calm, calculated awareness. His eyes met those of Crusher's closest allies, the ones who had once followed him unquestioningly. Now they hesitated, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether loyalty still held meaning. Respect had shifted in the air, silent but palpable, and they could feel the unspoken truth. This man commanded it effortlessly. Seagal spoke, his voice low, but carrying clearly across the yard. Strength isn't shown in rage, it's shown in control. You attacked without thinking, relying on intimidation and ego. That's always a mistake. The words hit harder than any strike. The inmates exchanged glances, whispers spreading. He's untouchable. Not just strong, controlled, precise. Even the guards, previously skeptical, recognized the authority in his tone and posture. Crusher finally managed to sit up, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. He had ruled this yard through fear, but fear alone was not enough here. He had underestimated the quiet power that Seagal carried. For the first time, he felt exposed, vulnerable, not physically, but socially, psychologically. The respect he had demanded through threats and brutality had been stripped away, replaced with something far more powerful, silent authority. One by one, other inmates began to nod subtly, acknowledging the new hierarchy forming before them. Whispers spread like wildfire. He moves differently. Nothing we've seen. He's not just fighting, he's teaching. Seagal continued, addressing the yard without malice, without ego. Violence without control is chaos. Power without respect is meaningless. Those who believe dominance comes from intimidation will always fail against someone who knows themselves, who knows their limits, and who acts with purpose. The implications were immediate. Even the most hardened inmates realized that the old rules had shifted. Crusher, once untouchable, now sat surrounded by uncertainty. His friends and allies looked at him with hesitation, unsure of whether to continue loyalty or to step back. The prison yard had collectively witnessed a transformation, not just of a man, but of the invisible order that governed it. Seagal's calm had done what no fight could have done alone. It had revealed the truth of authority. Power was not in loud threats or aggressive strikes. It was in precision, control, and the ability to command attention without demanding it. Those who observed understood instantly. This was mastery. And mastery earned respect that fear could never buy. A few younger inmates stepped closer cautiously, curiosity overcoming fear. They had never seen such skill, such composure, such dominance paired with silence. Even the guards now moved slightly to give him space, recognizing the balance of power had shifted. Crusher finally attempted to speak, his voice shaky. I didn't know. Seagal shook his head slightly, eyes unwavering. You don't need to know who I am to understand what happens when arrogance meets skill. That is all. The yard absorbed the words, their weight settling over everyone present. Whispered conversations spread quickly, repeating the lesson. Respect is earned, intimidation is fleeting, and power shows itself quietly, without chaos. By the time Seagal moved toward the yard's exit, the transformation was complete. Inmates who had once ruled through fear now watched with deference, recognizing a new order, one defined not by rage, but by calm authority. Crusher slumped back, humiliated, finally realizing that his reign had ended. Seagal walked on, silent and composed, leaving a yard forever changed behind him. Every man present had witnessed a revelation. Real power was measured not by who could hit hardest, but by who could remain unshaken, controlled, and untouchable in every sense of the word. The whispers grew into murmurs of understanding. The bully's worst mistake had become everyone else's lesson, and the prison yard, once dominated by loud threats and fragile egos, had learned a truth that would echo long after the morning sun had climbed higher in the sky. The prison yard had changed. The clatter of daily routine persisted, but a subtle shift in energy threaded through the concrete and metal. Inmates who once strutted with arrogance now walked with careful awareness. Those who had relied on intimidation realized that the quiet, precise force of Steven Seagal was a standard far beyond their reckoning. Crusher, once the self-proclaimed king of this section of the yard, remained on the cracked ground, slowly pushing himself up. Each movement was heavy, deliberate, burdened by shame. His muscles burned not from exertion, but from the sting of humiliation. He had been bested, not by luck, not by numbers, but by calm skill, precision, and control. The man who had been his target had not raised his voice, had not shouted, had not shown an ounce of unnecessary aggression. And yet, he had demolished Crusher's ego completely. Steven Seagal stood a few meters away, his presence unshaken, almost serene. He observed the yard, scanning faces, absorbing reactions, noting who had watched closely and who had averted their eyes. He wasn't here to punish indiscriminately, nor to gloat. Every move was measured, every glance intentional respect. He knew could not be demanded, could only be earned. A few of Crusher's allies hesitated nearby, torn between loyalty to a man whose power had been publicly shattered and the instinct to align with someone who clearly commanded the yard. Even the guards, usually indifferent to the subtle politics of inmate hierarchy, recognized the transformation. The balance of authority had shifted, and the presence of Seagal had tipped the scales decisively. Seagal approached Crusher slowly, each step deliberate, as if weighing the gravity of his actions. "You attacked without thinking," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You relied on anger and ego instead of skill and awareness. That's a mistake most people never recover from." Crusher swallowed hard, chest heaving. He had expected confrontation, he had expected fear, but he had not expected mastery. Not this kind of control, not this quiet force that left him exposed, humiliated, and completely powerless in front of the entire yard. The other inmates watched as Seagal turned his attention to them, addressing the yard as a whole rather than a single target. "Power isn't about who can hit the hardest," he said. "It isn't about who can intimidate the loudest. Real strength is measured by calmness, precision, and control. Respect is earned, not demanded." Murmurs spread across the yard. Heads nodded subtly. Whispered acknowledgments passed from one inmate to another. He's untouchable, disciplined, controlled. The lessons were sinking in, hard-earned through observation, rather than force. Crusher's friends finally stepped away, the tension between loyalty and self-preservation too strong to ignore. The yard's hierarchy, once dictated by aggression, had begun to rearrange itself. Those who had relied on fear to dominate now found themselves questioning their methods, reconsidering their strategies, and measuring every move more carefully. Seagal, sensing the shift, allowed himself a brief pause. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flex. He didn't need to. The yard had already absorbed the message. His work here, though brief, was complete. The bully had been humbled, respect had been restored to those who deserved it, and order had been redefined not through chaos, but through controlled power. A few younger inmates, previously intimidated by the likes of Crusher, now approached cautiously, observing the calm figure that had dismantled their fears. Some even offered subtle nods of acknowledgement, recognizing a force far greater than the empty posturing they had known. The guards, now attentive, allowed Seagal to walk freely, a silent acknowledgement that this man had established authority without incident, without disruption, without escalation. He moved with purpose, yet without urgency, each step reinforcing the quiet dominance he carried naturally. Crusher finally rose fully. His head bowed slightly, a gesture of reluctant acceptance. His reign of fear was over. The yard had seen a new model of power, one that was measured, calm, precise, and commanding. The whispers of awe and respect that followed Seagal's every step reinforced a simple truth. Intimidation can only carry you so far, but mastery, discipline, and self-control endure. As Seagal reached the edge of the yard, he glanced back one last time. The lesson had been delivered. The bully's mistake had been exposed, and the yard's hierarchy had subtly but irrevocably shifted. In the wake of his passage, the atmosphere was no longer dominated by fear alone, but by the unmistakable recognition of true authority. With measured steps, Steven Seagal walked toward the exit, silent, composed, untouchable. Behind him, the yard buzzed quietly, the echoes of the lesson settling deep into the collective consciousness of every man present. Today, the bully had fallen, the lesson had been learned, and the prison yard had been transformed. Not through chaos, not through loud threats, but through calm, precise, unshakable power. The prison yard had returned to its daily rhythm, the clanging of metal gates and the shuffle of footsteps filling the space once more. Yet beneath the routine, something had changed. Every man who had witnessed Steven Seagal's confrontation with Crusher carried the lesson silently. A weight heavier than any chains, a truth clearer than any shouted command. Respect could not be demanded, and power could not be faked. Crusher, the former bully, had slumped into a corner, his chest still heaving. But this time, the physical exhaustion was secondary to the deeper realization gnawing at him. He had underestimated a man who did not rely on anger, aggression, or loud threats. He had misjudged the strength that came from calmness, skill, and control. The shame of his miscalculation would linger longer than any bruise, longer than any scar. Steven Seagal walked through the yard, silent, composed, untouchable. His eyes scanned the faces of the inmates, meeting some briefly, ignoring others entirely. There was no triumph in his gaze, no hint of gloating. He did not need to assert dominance through force or intimidation. His authority was inherent, built on a foundation of mastery, patience, and unwavering control. As he moved, the whispers spread. Inmates repeated what they had seen, the quiet dismantling of aggression, the precision of each movement, the calm defiance that left Crusher exposed and humiliated. These were not just words. They were lessons. Lessons that would shape the hierarchy and the culture of the yard for weeks, maybe months to come. Strength isn't loud, one inmate muttered to another. It's silent, controlled, calculated. And respect. The other replied quietly, you earn it, you don't take it. Seagal's presence alone had rewritten the unspoken rules. He had shown that power was not measured in volume or violence, but in composure and skill. Aggression alone could dominate temporarily, but mastery endured. He had demonstrated that those who relied solely on intimidation were fragile, their authority superficial and fleeting. He paused at the gate, the sunlight catching the lines of experience on his face. For a moment, the yard seemed to hold its collective breath again, as if acknowledging the conclusion of the lesson. Crusher's humiliation had served as the perfect example. Arrogance, unchecked aggression, and ego could never withstand precision, calm, and self-control. Steven Seagal finally spoke, his voice low but carrying through the yard. Violence without discipline is weakness. Power without respect is meaningless. Those who rely on fear will always fall to those who rely on mastery. The words were simple, yet every man present felt their weight. In a place dominated by noise, chaos, and ego, this calm authority left a deeper impression than any punch ever could. It was a truth that went beyond the walls, beyond the fences, a principle that applied not just in prison yards, but in life itself. True strength was internal, and respect was earned, not stolen. Some inmates nodded subtly. Others simply watched, absorbing the lesson silently. Even Crusher's closest followers seemed to reconsider their choices, questioning loyalty, dominance, and what it truly meant to command authority. The yard was no longer the same. The hierarchy had shifted quietly but irrevocably. Seagal turned and walked away, leaving the yard behind him. Each step reinforced the lesson, a living example of control and mastery behind him. Whispers turned into stories that would be retold countless times. The day the bully was humbled, the day respect was taught without anger, the day real power revealed itself quietly, calmly, and definitively. And as the gates clanged shut and the day continued, one truth lingered in the minds of every inmate, every guard, and anyone who heard the story: strength is calm, not loud. Respect is earned, not demanded. Power lies in control, precision, and patience. Arrogance, aggression, and ego are temporary. Mastery endures. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Never underestimate someone based on appearance, reputation, or bravado. True authority is quiet, precise, and unshakable. Those who understand this thrive, those who do not fall. Type respect over fear if you believe strength is about skill, not intimidation, and share where you're learning this lesson from. Your voice matters. The prison yard had returned to motion, but nothing would ever be quite the same. The bully had learned his lesson, the inmates had learned theirs, and one man's calm, untouchable presence had left a mark far deeper than any fight ever could.